with MacDee. Today we're joined by retired Lieutenant Colonel Hartman from the U.S. Army. He did 30 years, and he had quite the career. He did 3 years of enlisted and became a sergeant, and then he became a aviation warrant officer. Did that for 6 years, and then he became an officer and retired as a lieutenant colonel after 21 years. So thank you for joining me today. Thank you for taking the time to be here. Let's dive into our warm-up questions. So what is your favorite fast food restaurant?
Uh, I'm kind of a hamburger guy, so In-N-Out Burger is probably one of my favorites today. It's good, and we've only recently got them down here in San Antonio,
Oh,
so
okay.
I've become quite a fan.
Awesome. What's your favorite holiday?
I think it's for me. I like the summer and I like water sports. So probably Fourth of July or Labor Day. But if I had to lean one or the other, it would be Fourth of July. And I said I like water sports. I don't know if your parents told you, but I was a nationally ranked competitive barefoot water skier
Oh,
and
wow.
held a U.S. record for 7 years in that event. So I like the summertime. I like the water. And so growing up, I always remembered the water and around Fourth of July. And the other thing I remember about the Fourth of July, my first air show I ever went to, I think was in 1963, and I saw the Thunderbirds perform. And so I would have been about 10 years old, and that's what gave me the bug to get into aviation. And
Okay.
I didn't realize it at the time, but years and years later, my mom showed me an article I had written in the fourth grade where I laid
Mhm.
out my career. And I said I wanted to go in the Air Force, become an Air Force pilot, then get out of the Air Force and fly commercial airliners at some point. So I didn't even remember writing that article for essay for school, but
Mhm.
that's where the bug got me. So it was around the Fourth of July, and it was an air show, and the first time I saw the Thunderbirds. I believe they were flying F-100s at the time, so that's a ways back.
That's awesome. And then what's the favorite place that you've traveled to in the United States?
I would have said Grand Canyon, but 2 summers ago we went out to Big Bend National Park in the southwest part of Texas, and we were looking for somewhere to go take the grandkids on spring break. And Grand Canyon was just going to be too far to go. Try to get there in a week. So I heard about Big Bend National Park, but had never been there. So we went there, and it was less than a day drive from San Antonio. It was fantastic. I mean, it was like Grand Canyon, a little smaller scale, but it was the same, just huge like that, and right on the Rio Grande River, and just a remarkable place. And I mean, I've lived in Texas for 20 some odd years and lived stationed out of El Paso at Fort Bliss for years and just never knew. I knew it was there, but I never went there. And I'm glad I went because it's really a remarkable place.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. So why did you join the military? Obviously, you wanted to do aviation because of that bug. So is that your main push?
Yes, it was. And so then I got married at early age and was a father at age 18, married and a father at age 18. And I found out you can't go to the academy
Mm,
if you're married or ever have been married. And so that kind of slowed down my college aspirations. And at the time, this was 69, 70 time frame, 71, and Vietnam was going on, and I had a job, and I was working around a guy that had been a crew chief in Vietnam, so I got the aviation bug,
mm,
and he and I was waiting around to get drafted. I had so when I got my draft number in 1971, it was a high lottery number. So what they do is they selected a number for your birthday. Mine's
mm,
April 26th, and then assign a number 1 through 365. So it'd be like almost like playing bingo. They pull out for your birthday, they pull out a number and they assign that number to your birthday. Then everybody born on that day for that year, that's their sequence number. Mine was 301. And then when they took people for the draft, they only, however many they needed for that year, they would take up to a certain number. Well, they didn't need, Vietnam was just starting to draw down at the time, so didn't need that many. So I
mm.
didn't get drafted, still wanted to go. So I went down and talked to the recruiters. And this guy that had been a former crew chief in Vietnam told me that if you want to get into aviation, Avionics mechanic is the way to go because it's a little cleaner than actually turning the wrenches and getting grease all over your hands.
Hmm.
It's around aviation, and yet you're working on radios, and so that's what I did. I went and talked to the Air Force recruiter first, and Air Force recruiter said, "Yep, we can guarantee you a skill, but we need with a six-year commitment." Because at your age, at 18, when I was talking to the recruiters, 6-year commitment is a long time.
Yeah.
And it made me a little nervous. So then I went and talked to the Army, and at the Army, because the Army is the biggest of the services, they need more people. They're a little more willing to negotiate. And so for the Army, I could get guaranteed for you to be an avionics mechanic with a 3-year commitment. So that's where I went.
Oh, okay. Okay. That makes sense. Cool. What was the hardest thing about leaving for you for training?
I think the biggest thing was, I was leaving behind a young wife and child.
Yeah.
That was 72. Uncle Eric is my son, Gunny Hartman.
Yeah.
He was born in 71. So he would have been like about a year old. And so it was leaving the family. Now, fortunately for us, we lived in the St. Louis area, and I went to basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, which is only 125 miles away. So it was not too terribly bad. And
That's good.
my wife and son we had family there. So that was a support group to get us through it. So that's probably the hardest thing, was just making that adjustment and the commitment to go.
Yeah, especially having the family so young. Do you have a funniest memory from training?
I think probably the funniest thing is if everybody that goes to basic training is the gas chamber, and it's when you got to pull your mask off and state your name and your social security number is what we did at the time, and it comes out of there crying and puking, and it's not fun at the time, but when you look back on it, it's kind of humorous.
Yeah, pretty good time. What was the hardest obstacle that you faced at basic?
At 18, I had run track and cross country in high school, so I was fit. So the physical fitness side wasn't difficult, and the mental part didn't bother me either, because it was something I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think my biggest challenge was on the rifle range. And it wasn't qualifying, but I wanted to be an expert with the M16, and so I didn't want to just do the bare minimums. I wanted to do as well as I could, and I did fire expert. But I mean, it was a challenge for me. I had to, because I didn't grow up around guns. My parents didn't hunt or fish, and so I didn't really grow up around guns. I had a BB gun as a kid, so I knew basics of that. But it's a little different when you're shooting a 300-meter target.
Yeah.
And you're under time to do it, and you're under a little bit of a duress. So it was that was probably the hardest thing I had to do. Only made harder because I wanted to do well.
Yeah, for sure. So then, did you have a chance to graduate up from boot camp, or did you graduate as a private?
No, I came in as a private E1, and we hadn't been there 2 or 3 weeks. I don't know how long it was, and I was made an acting squad leader. And so because I was a squad leader when I graduated as an E2. So I graduated boot camp as an E2, and I remember I graduated right around my birthday in April. So when I got home, my parents, they had a birthday party for me when I got home. And I was so proud, and I still remember the picture they took. I was so proud of, I came home in my Class A uniform, and when they took the picture of us sitting around the table with the birthday cake, I kind of leaned in my right shoulder in there so they would see that mosquito wing on my sleeve. I was really proud to get that first stripe coming out of basic.
Yeah, for sure. It helps to not be a slick sleeve coming out. What was next for you after basic training?
Yeah, I went to AIT, Advanced Individual Training for the Army, and I went to Fort Gordon, Georgia, to become an avionics mechanic. That was a 4.5-month long course, and while I was there, I got promoted to E3, private first class E3, because of the amount of time you had to have in grade and time in service. And so at that time, I made E3 while I was there. I learned to work on helicopter radios and aircraft systems. And then I graduated in the top 10%. Well, they promoted the top 10% another grade. So with October, so I'd been in the Army little over 8 months, and I was an E4. So that was one of the things I liked about the military was it was a structure, and if you performed well and if you did better than most of the people, then you tend to get recognized for that.
Yeah.
And as an 18-year-old with a child at home, more rank and on your sleeve meant more money in your pocket to help support the family. So I was fortunate.
Yeah, that's good. That's nice that you were able to rank up real quick.
Yeah.
I guess where did you go for your first assignment?
Yeah, that's interesting too, because the things the recruiter doesn't tell you. So, I came out of school in E4,
Mm-hmm.
and they signed me to Fort Hood, Texas.
Okay.
And I said, okay, Fort Hood, Texas, 1st Cavalry Division is there, Air Cavalry, Vietnam, Air Cavalry, I think, man, this is good. So I show up at Fort Hood, Texas. I go to the 1st Cavalry Division, the replacement station there, and they look at my orders and they said, son, you're in the wrong place. You're supposed to be down the road in the 2nd Armored Division. I'm thinking, 2nd Armored Division, do they have helicopters? So I go down to the 2nd Armored Division and I go to the replacement station there, and I'm waiting my time. This is similar when you're at MEPS and you're waiting to talk to the guidance counselor, to get your MOS and everything is still established for you. So I'm waiting for my time to see this guy. And at that time, because Vietnam was still going on, and they were doing a lot of what we called one-station training. So if you were going to be armor, you went to basic training, and then you went straight to your unit, and they kind of did OJT, on-the-job training there.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there listening to these other people, and they're signing them to infantry or armor or mortars or something like that. And my time gets up there, and he says, okay, so what do you want to do? And I said, what are you talking about? I got an MOS. I'm an avionics mechanic, 35 kilo. He said, yep, you and 35 other guys that I got here. He said, we don't need you. So here's your choice. You can be an 11 Bush, Charlie, or Echo. 11B is infantry. 11 Charlie is mortarman, or 11 Echo is a tanker. I said, well, I don't want to walk. I don't know anything about mortars. I said, so sign me up for tanks. So I get assigned to a tank company, Alpha Company 266 Armor. And as I'm at the battalion headquarters, the adjutant had to call down and order the company commander to send somebody to come and get me, because the company commander didn't want me. I wasn't a tanker. I didn't know anything about tanks. And, I was just what we call an MOS not qualified guy. And so came up and got me. And about 2 weeks later, they said, write radios. So I became the tank radio repairman for the company. And a few months later, the first sergeant said, Hartman, we need more guys on the CQ roster. So they made me an acting sergeant. And so I was wearing sergeant stripes within a year of being in the Army.
Wow.
I think they recognized some kind of leadership skills or something. I don't know. But I mean, I was getting paid as an E4, but I was wearing the rank of an E5, an acting jack, as we called it.
Oh, okay. So how long were you a tanker?
Yeah, so I was there about 18 months and learning to. I drove tanks just for a very short amount of time, and then because I was the commo specialist, then became the commo NCO, because in a tank company it was an E5 was the commo NCO. And so I was driving a 113 armored personnel carrier. That's what I drove, when that's where we did our radio repairs out of. And so I was there about 18 months, and I got on levy to go to Germany, and I went and talked to the folks at the replacement station there, or the assignments folks, and I said, look, I've never even been in aviation. I joined the Army to be in aviation. Sure would like to get in aviation. They said, yeah, we agree. And so they sent me to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where your cousin Rachel is right now. And sent me to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and I went to a Chinook battalion, Chinook helicopter battalion. I finally got to work on radios. So I got there. Got promoted to E5. So I had 2 years in the Army, and I got actually promoted to E5 and got paid for it. And I found out while I was there that you could apply for what's called the Warrant Officer Flight Training Program.
Yeah.
And so now I was in an aviation unit. I was interested in going into aviate, to learn to fly. That's what I always wanted to do. Remember the Thunderbirds in the fourth grade. So I applied for the Warrant Officer Flight Training Program. At the time, I had no college, and they were telling me that if your application would be more favorably considered if you had some college hours. So
Hmm.
I went to Cameron College off post and started taking night classes. And when I think my application went in, I think I might have had 9 semester hours. I got accepted to the Warrant Officer Flight Training Program. So packed up the car one more time when we moved to Fort Rucker, Alabama. Went to flight school and graduated from flight school a year later as a Warrant Officer 1 aviator, and went to the 101st Airborne Division, where had a lot of fun learning how to fly a military aircraft. You learn to fly at flight school, but you
Hmm.
actually put it in practice. And what a great place to be, 101st Airborne Division. A lot of Vietnam vets coming back, and so I learned a lot about aviation from those guys.
Cool. So then after that, what was your first assignment as a, I guess that was your first assignment as a warrant officer. So then
Yeah.
were you there for your full 6 years?
No, so I was there in 101st for 3 years, and then when I was leaving there, they sent me to become an instructor pilot. So I became an instructor pilot on the OH-58 Alpha and Charlie, which was a scout helicopter.
Hmm.
I did that on my way to Korea. So I went to Korea, and again, still as a warrant officer, got over to Korea, and I was they had too many instructor pilots, so I was just going to be a line pilot. And shortly after I'd been there, the 3-star general from up north, the northern part of Korea, he fired his helicopter pilot, his personal pilot, because the guy got drunk and disorderly.
Mm.
So they pressed me into service and said, Hartman, you're an instructor pilot. The 3-stars general has to have an instructor pilot for his personal pilot. So I became the personal pilot for a 3-star general for the last 9 months of my tour in Korea. It was an interesting experience. I was a dirty boot cavalry guy, scout,
Yeah.
and I didn't want to go fly VIPs, bus driver stuff. But it was an interesting experience because I learned some different aspect about flying. When you're flying attack helicopters or scout helicopters, you're down in the trees, down in the weeds, and it's got nothing to do with being smooth on the controls. It's about getting the mission done.
Yeah.
And so then when you're flying general officers, it's all about being as smooth as you can. All they want to know in the back is what time they take off, what time they land, and they don't want any excitement en route. So it's a different kind of flying. So I did that. When I left Korea, I went to the Warrant Officer Advanced course, and while I was there, myself and another guy got interested. The Army was looking was short commissioned officers, and they were offering direct commissions to warrant officers that were interested. By that time, I was just short of my bachelor's degree. I'd already got an associate's degree when I was in the 101st by going to night classes and Saturday classes. And then I continued going after school, after hours to college. And then, so I was just short of my bachelor's degree. And the other guy and I wanted to apply. I was interested in military intelligence. Not so much I was interested in military intelligence as I wanted to fly the Mohawk, which was the Army's twin turboprop engine, had an ejection seat. So it was the closest thing the Army had to a fighter
Hmm.
to my Thunderbird days.
Yeah.
So I applied, and when the results came back and said, well, we give you a direct commission, you didn't get your first choice, which was MI, but they gave me armor branch, back to my armor roots again, since I'd
Yeah.
been a tanker and had been in the cavalry, that's tank oriented. So they sent me to armor advanced course. And Cobra transition, so I started flying Cobras, and I went to the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment. So it was a direct commission. So I went from, I was a senior warrant officer 2, had a sequence number for W3, so I'd already been selected for promotion to warrant officer 3, but I never actually penned it on because they pinned on first lieutenant rank instead when I got a direct commission. So I went from W2 to first lieutenant as a direct commission.
Okay. 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 Cool. Wow, that's crazy. The whole process of you and Enlisted still amazes me. That you were like within a year, or no, within 2 years, you were,
Yep.
things hard. That's crazy. Okay,
That's
let's
called,
jump back.
it's referred to as being a maverick. Uh, folks that become officers up through the ranks, those are considered mavericks. So
Okay.
term maverick, that's what it is. Somebody that came up through the ranks and became a commissioned officer.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Cool. So let's jump back into just the military life category now that we know how you made it through all your ranks and stuff. So out of all the places that you got to travel to, what was your favorite place?
I was very fortunate after my tour in the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment. Uh, I got selected to go to England to be an exchange instructor pilot with the British Army Air Corps. And so I went to England, and I was teaching British students how to fly British helicopters. We were the only Americans on the camp, and the Brits treated us extremely well. And I was very fortunate because their instructor pilots course that you have to go through is like a 5-month long course. It's a very long course, and it's very very difficult and strenuous. And all the services go there. The Army Air Corps goes there, the Royal Navy goes there, and the Royal Air Force go there. So everybody goes to the same course. And then there was myself, and there was another exchange student from the United Arab Emirates who was there.
Oh, cool.
And most of the guys at the end of the day, after either doing classroom stuff or doing flying stuff, they would go to the officers' mess and have a beer or two. I wasn't particularly interested in doing that because you had to dress up to go there. I wasn't particularly interested in doing it. They have a very formal dress code. So I would sit in a room at night and study. And the other reason I was studying because the guy that I replaced in that job the Brits fired him, didn't want him because he was basically an ugly American. He wasn't representing the American country very well. So I wanted to remove that thought when I got there. So I studied hard, and came graduation time, I took both the ground school honors and the flying honors. First foreigner had ever done that. So I beat all the Brits at their own game. I beat them at the ground school and beat them at their flying school. So I came out very well. They were very pleased with me for doing that. So instead of just flying the Gazelle scout helicopter, they also gave me a transition onto the Lynx, which was their equivalent of a attack helicopter. So it looks a lot like a Huey, but they also had tow missiles strapped to the side of it, so you could use it either in a utility mode or an attack helicopter mode. And so I became an instructor pilot on both of those aircraft. And then the second year I was there, I was on their display team. Kind of goes back to the Thunderbird theme again, remember? So
Yeah.
I was on the British Silver Eagles helicopter display team for the second year that I was there. So we would do our day job as instructor pilots, and we would rehearse like 7 o'clock in the morning, and then we would go to air shows. So we went to air shows, had special made flight suits, and just like the Thunderbirds and that kind of thing. And so we would go do that. We went all over England, over into the continent, over to Belgium, over to Germany, and did air shows. So it was pretty interesting. And so as an American there, my raider, my first line supervisor, was a British major. My second line supervisor, senior raider as we would call it in rating terms, was a American American MI colonel who was the military attaché in the embassy in London. So every 6 months you would see him. Either he would come out to visit you, or you would all get together for an annual conference. There were 50 exchange officers and non-commissioned officers in England. So everybody else, when they met the colonel, he would ride a train out or ride a car out or something like that. When it was my turn to entertain him, I would fly up to London, pick him up at the embassy, fly him down the River Thames, right past the Houses of Parliament, no higher than 300 feet because we had to stay below the Heathrow traffic. So I'd fly him back down there, spend the day with him. I'd pick him up in one helicopter, and I'd take him back in a different helicopter. I mean, so talk about just a unique opportunity. So that's probably the best job I ever had in my 30 years in the Army.
Awesome. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. So obviously you spent a lot of time there in London and in England. Did you have a chance to interact with the natives and the culture there?
Absolutely. So we entertained a lot. The British are very big on entertaining, and so we would go to their house, and it was very formal. I'd go to the officers' mess, and you always have a salute to the Queen. Drink a toast to the Queen, and learned a lot about their culture and their social things. And then the 4th of July, and we're going back to talk about favorite holiday. 4th of July, we would invite the officers over to our quarters. And over there, we were in shorts, t-shirts, barbecue outside, and
Yeah.
and had them drinking beer, because it was a place I could go to. RAF Greenham Common had Americans on it about an hour and a half away, and I could go up there and use the PX and get beer and stuff. And so we would entertain them down there. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's super cool. This is one of my favorite questions is, was there an act of courage in someone else that you wanted to share? Either could have been that you saw or heard about.
Uh, the Let me think about that one for a minute. I've seen some pretty impressive stuff. Probably one of the most unique stories that I know personally. I currently work with a guy now that I hired him civil service. After I retired for 30 years, now I'm working civil service, and I hired a guy. He was a retired Army Master Sergeant E8, and I hired him, and he was one of the guys on the recovery team at Black Hawk Down in Mogadishu. And he was a special ops guy, and just hearing some of the stories that he did firsthand of when they went in to recover the crew from the Black Hawk Down was pretty impressive. So yeah, that was a lot of other stories, but that's one that probably jumps to my mind right now.
Yeah.
He's just a very low key guy, typical hero. Doesn't talk about himself, and but he was the guy that was there, and when you drag the story out of him, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah. How was adjusting to civilian life for you?
Yeah, it was interesting because after doing it for 30 years and doing something that you loved and wanted to do your whole career, it was kind of a strange transition. I was ready, and what I thought about doing, I really thought about going out and flying commercially. But I had well over 3,600 hours of helicopter time, instructor pilot on 4 different helicopters, so I had a lot of instructor pilot time. What I found was in the fixed wing side of the house, I didn't have enough airplane time to do me any good. All I had was just be on a private pilot license and fixed wing. And helicopter, I had plenty of time, but the jobs just weren't very good. The best I could hope for here in San Antonio was to fly life flight, and that's fun when you're in your 20s, but at the time I was like 48 when I retired from the Army. That wasn't what I wanted to do, so got into civil service, and so I'm continuing to serve that way. So I haven't gotten very far from the military. I'm still serving. I'm just serving in a different capacity, and I always wanted to go another trip downrange. So I volunteered and went to Afghanistan, and I was the deputy garrison commander at Bagram Airfield, largest military base in Afghanistan. So I was in Bagram from 2011 to 2012, but I went as an Army civilian this time. So
yeah.
So the bottom line to your question, I never really got very far from it. I just changed from a uniform to a shirt and tie that I wear now.
Yeah. No, it's cool though. I like that. So if you go back over and do it all over again, would you?
Absolutely. No question about it. I can't think of anything I'd really do different. It was every opportunity was that presented itself. I took advantage of it, and what I found, if you work hard, you take advantage of the opportunities you're given, you can go a lot of places. And so I saw 2 tours in Korea, saw Germany 3 different times, going over there and living in the woods in Germany. And my first experience with just about getting frostbite was in 1973. So yeah, there was a I don't know. I don't think I would change any of it. It was very good for me.
Yeah. What three words would you use to describe your military career?
Opportunity, uh, fairness, and success. Because I think that's what you will find in the military. Uh, I grew up in East St. Louis, Illinois, and during a lot of the civil rights struggles in the 60s, and there were a lot of racial problems in the 60s. I saw a lot of that at Fort Hood in the early 70s, guys coming back from Vietnam that were draftees that didn't want to be in the military, wanted to get out, had a chip on their shoulder. And so I saw a lot of that. But what I also saw was the great strides the military makes to treat everybody equally. And so the opportunities are there. And if you take advantage of the opportunity and you work hard, you'll achieve success. Whatever your goals are, if you want it, there's a structure there, and all you have to do is play by the rules, work a little harder than the next guy, and you'll get ahead. And I think that's all we can ask for in life is just the opportunity. You know, nobody's going to give you anything for free.
Right.
So if you know that the opportunity is there, and you know what the rules are, hey, all you got to do is follow the rules, work hard, you'll get ahead.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your service. God bless you, sir. Thank you.
You're quite welcome.